The thing nobody told you about the life you've been living. There is a moment, and maybe you've felt it, where everything is exactly right. The apartment is clean, the relationship is warm, the money is there, the body feels good, the morning coffee is perfect. Everything is exactly where you arranged it, and you sit down finally in the middle of all of it, and you feel nothing, or worse, you feel this faint, inexplicable dread, like something is about to be taken away, like you haven't actually arrived anywhere, like the happiness you were promised, the happiness you worked your entire life to manufacture, isn't here, wasn't here, may never come. And your first instinct is to fix something, to change something, to acquire something new, or cut something loose, or try something different. Because the problem must be external. It must be that the apartment needs to be bigger, or the relationship needs to be better, or the goal needs to be upgraded. The happiness is coming. You just haven't done enough yet. You just haven't become enough yet. That is the lie. That is the oldest, most beautiful, most destructive lie you have ever believed. And no one told you it was a lie. They handed it to you wrapped in the language of ambition and self-improvement, and you carried it your whole life like it was a gift. I want to tell you a story, not a fable, not a metaphor, a real story, or as real as any story gets when it lives at the center of a human life. His name was Marcus, 41 years old. Not unsuccessful, you have to understand that, because this story isn't about failure. Marcus had done everything right. He had the kind of life that looked like the answer from the outside. Corner office, nice neighborhood, a daughter he adored. He ran half marathons in the fall and read books in the summer, and had friends he'd known since college who still made him laugh the way only old friends can. On paper, and he was aware of this, which made everything worse, he had solved it. He had solved the problem of building a good life, and somewhere around his 39th birthday, he noticed it. Not dramatically, not in a breakdown, not in a moment of crisis, just he noticed it the way you notice a slow leak. A faint, persistent flatness underneath everything. He would be in the middle of something good, dinner with his daughter, a great workout, a genuinely funny conversation, and there would be this thin layer of glass between him and the experience, like he was watching his own life from a few inches behind his own eyes, feeling it but not quite reaching it. He told himself it was exhaustion. He told himself it was winter. He told himself it would pass when the project at work was finished, when the renovation was done, when summer came. And when summer came, he told himself it would pass when summer was over. He started optimizing. He downloaded apps. He read about dopamine. He took cold showers and eliminated sugar and started meditating 45 minutes a day with the rigor of someone training for combat. He had 4 different journals, one for gratitude, one for goals, one for tracking his mood, one for what he called clarity. He was working on himself the way a man might restore an antique engine, with precision, with investment, with the belief that enough work would eventually produce a purr. It didn't purr. What Marcus had, and what took him 2 more years to understand, was not a problem of optimization. He was not lacking the right habit, the right morning routine, the right affirmation. What he had was a relationship with himself so thin, so transactional, so based entirely on performance and output and achievement, that he had never actually met the person he was trying to make happy. He had been chasing happiness like a drug, not metaphorically, literally, in the neurochemical sense. Every goal was a hit, every achievement was a spike, every new version of the plan was a promise of the next high. And between the hits, in the ordinary, unspectacular middle of a regular Tuesday, there was this hollow ache that he kept trying to paper over with more doing, more planning, more becoming. He didn't need another habit. He needed to love himself, not as a concept, not as a self-help instruction, as the single most practical, most radical, most life-altering thing a human being can do. He needed to build an actual relationship with the person who lived inside his chest. This book is not going to tell you how to be happy. That is not what I'm here to do. The world is already full of things telling you how to be happy, and you've tried most of them, and here you are. What this book is going to do is something stranger and harder and ultimately more real. It's going to walk you into the room you've been avoiding, the room where the person you actually are has been waiting, not to be fixed, not to be upgraded, not to be finally good enough, but to be known, to be met, to be loved by the one person whose love could actually change everything. You, not you performing, not you achieving, not you in your best moment with your best face. You, complicated, contradictory, sometimes exhausted, sometimes afraid, sometimes brilliant, always more than you've allowed yourself to believe. You. We are going to go there together. 14 chapters, each one a door. Some of them are going to be uncomfortable to open. One of them is going to surprise you in a way I can't explain yet, because the surprise only works if you get there yourself. The first and the last chapters are the ones that will stay with you the longest, because the beginning and the ending of any real transformation are where the truth lives, unprotected by the comfortable middle. Before we go further, before we move into what's ahead, I want you to do one thing. Stop. Not literally, not if you're driving or walking, but internally, stop. Stop thinking about what you're going to do after this. Stop running the list of things that need to be handled. Stop the low-level broadcast of self-evaluation that runs in most of us like a radio station we can't quite find the dial for. Just, for the length of one full breath, stop. Breathe in and ask yourself, honestly, without judgment, when was the last time you felt at home inside yourself? Not happy, necessarily, not successful, not on, not performing well or looking good or impressing someone, just home, comfortable, settled, like you were exactly where you were supposed to be and the person you were being was exactly who you actually are. If the answer comes easily, this book will go deep. If the answer doesn't come at all, if you sat with that question and felt a strange blankness, or a recognition that it's been a very long time, or an ache you can't quite name, then I want you to know something. That ache is not a sign that something is wrong with you. That ache is the beginning of something right. Let's go. Chapter 2. The drug nobody warns you about. Here is what happiness does to the brain. When you get something you want, something you've been working toward, something you've been anticipating, your brain releases dopamine, not in response to the thing itself, in response to the prediction of the thing. The dopamine spike actually happens in the anticipation, in the leaning toward, in the almost there. And when the thing arrives, the spike drops. Not because the thing wasn't good, because the brain has moved on to the next prediction, the next lean, the next almost. This is not a flaw. This is design. The brain is built for pursuit, not arrival, for hunger, not fullness, for the next, not the now. This is why our ancestors didn't stop at one meal and call it a life. This is why we built cities and wrote symphonies and sent rockets to the moon. But here is what nobody tells you. When you wire your sense of self-worth to the dopamine of achievement, when your answer to the question, who am I, becomes what I have produced, what I have earned, what I have become, you turn yourself into a machine that can never by design feel like enough, because the machine is built to want the next hit. The machine cannot rest. The machine does not know how to arrive. The machine calls stillness failure and calls peace mediocrity and calls contentment giving up. And the machine is very good at sounding like self-improvement. This is the cruelest part. The addiction to external happiness doesn't look like addiction. It looks like drive. It looks like discipline. It looks like the kind of person who reads books like this one, who tracks their habits, who is always working on themselves. It looks like ambition. It looks like growth. But underneath the language of growth, there is often a deeper, quieter, less noble message. I am not enough yet. I will be enough when. I will rest when. I will love myself when. When is the drug, and when never arrives. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from this. Not physical exhaustion. You can sleep for 9 hours and wake up with it. It's the exhaustion of never being allowed to land, of always being in transit, of always having the next destination justify why you haven't enjoyed the current one. I've sat across from people who achieved extraordinary things, not hypothetically in the abstract, but real people, artists, executives, athletes, parents who raised exceptional children, writers whose work moved thousands of people, and the thread that ran through the ones who were quietly suffering was almost always this: they had learned to chase. They had never learned to receive. Receiving is different from chasing. Receiving requires stillness. It requires a kind of surrender that the chasing mind experiences as weakness. To receive a moment, to let it land, to let it be enough, to sit inside it without immediately asking what comes next. You have to trust that the present is not a failure. Most people can't do that. Most people, if you put them in a room with nothing to achieve, nothing to optimize, nowhere to improve, just themselves, just the present moment, just what's actually here, will find themselves reaching for the phone within 4 minutes. Not because they're addicted to the phone, because they're addicted to the away from. The self, unoccupied, unperforming, unproductive, has become unbearable, and we've built entire civilizations to help people avoid that unbearable feeling. Social media is a dopamine delivery system. So is overwork. So is obsessive planning. So is constant self-improvement. So is the endless consumption of content, books, podcasts, videos, that gives you the sensation of growth, without requiring you to be still long enough to actually integrate it. This is not me telling you to stop. This is not a chapter about giving up your ambitions or deleting your apps or living in enlightened simplicity. That is not the point. The point is to name what's actually happening, because you cannot change what you cannot see. What is actually happening, for many people reading these words right now, is this: you are using the pursuit of happiness as a way of avoiding the relationship with yourself that happiness would actually require. You are running towards something, and the thing you are running toward is real and good and worth wanting. But underneath the running is also a running away from the silence that might ask you hard questions, away from the stillness that might reveal something you don't want to see, away from the person inside the productivity, the person who exists when the doing stops. Here is something I want you to sit with. You have never been more than a few inches away from yourself. Through every goal, every achievement, every milestone and setback and ordinary day, you have always been right there, the one you've been performing for, the one you've been trying to convince, the one you have been, if we're honest, running from. And that person, the one right there, the one in your chest, the one behind your eyes, has been doing something remarkable this whole time. Something you haven't fully acknowledged. That person has been surviving you, surviving your self-criticism, surviving your impossible standards, surviving the contempt you feel when you fall short and the suspicion you feel when you succeed, surviving the constant renegotiation of your own worth, surviving the gap between who you are and who you've decided you need to become before you're allowed to relax into this life. That is not nothing. That is the most extraordinary thing I can tell you about yourself. You are still here after everything you've put yourself through, and that means something. It means the person worth loving was always there. You just never stopped moving long enough to meet them. Chapter 3. Who told you that you weren't enough? You were not born believing this. You were not born with a critical voice. You were not born checking whether you were adequate, measuring your value against some invisible standard, apologizing for taking up space. Nobody comes into the world like that. You watch a baby, a real one, not an abstraction, and they do not worry whether they deserve to be held. They do not earn their hunger. They do not qualify for love by being good enough at something. They simply exist, and that existence is sufficient, and they know it in every cell. At some point, you stopped knowing it, not all at once, not dramatically, more like a slow revision, a series of small moments that rewrote the original document, a look that meant you'd done something wrong, a word that meant your feeling was too big, too loud, too much, a lesson that linked your value to your performance, good grades, good behavior, good enough. the praise that came when you succeeded, and the silence that came when you didn't, and what that silence slowly taught you about what you were worth. Nobody did this to you on purpose. That's the hardest part, and also the most important part to understand. The people who shaped your early sense of self were mostly doing the best they could with what they had, which was itself a self that had been shaped by people who were doing the best they could. The wound is rarely the result of malice. It's the result of humans trying to love each other without having been fully loved themselves, passing along, unintentionally, the very beliefs that were limiting their own lives. Your mother may have taught you that rest is selfishness, because someone taught her that. Your father may have taught you that feelings are weakness, because someone taught him that. A teacher may have marked your work wrong, in a way that marked your whole self as insufficient, not because they were cruel, but because they never thought about what it means to grade a child's worth alongside their arithmetic. The beliefs that are running your life right now, the ones underneath the goals and the plans and the versions of yourself you're working towards, were mostly installed before you were old enough to choose them, before you were old enough to ask whether they were true. This is the question I want to ask you now. Are they true? Not the surface beliefs, not the manageable ones, the deep ones. The ones you don't say out loud because they live below the level of conversation. Things like, I am fundamentally too much and not enough at the same time. Things like, if people really knew me, all of me, the parts I've managed well and the parts I haven't, they would leave. Things like, love is something I have to earn, continuously, without ever being allowed to bank it, because the moment I stop performing it might be revoked. Are those true? I want you to notice what just happened when I asked that. Whether there was a kind of resistance, a part of you that wants to defend those beliefs, or that found the question somehow threatening, or that is already composing a reason why your situation is different. That resistance is important data, not because it means the beliefs are true, because it means they're old. Because it means they've been there so long they've become part of the furniture. You've stopped seeing them as beliefs. You've started experiencing them as facts. Here is what I know about the architecture of self-worth. It is not solid. It was built, which means it can be rebuilt. Not easily, not in a chapter, not by reading the right book or listening to the right podcast, but genuinely, actually, irreversibly rebuilt. If you are willing to do something very specific, you have to be willing to investigate the original construction, not to blame. Blame is a dead end. It's a way of keeping the wound alive while calling it understanding. Investigation is different. Investigation asks, where did this belief come from? What was it trying to do when it was installed? What was it protecting? And most importantly, does it still serve me? Because some of these beliefs did serve you once. The belief that you had to perform for love helped you survive an environment where love was conditional. The belief that you couldn't take up too much space helped you navigate a family system where someone else's volatility meant you had to make yourself small. The belief that you had to be constantly improving helped you escape a situation where staying still meant staying stuck. These were not weaknesses. They were adaptations. Brilliant, necessary, life-saving adaptations. The question is not whether they were adaptive then. The question is whether they are serving you now. And the second question, which is the deeper one, the one that this whole chapter is really asking, is this. Who would you be without them? Not who you'd perform, not who you'd present, who you'd actually be, in the quiet, when no one is looking, when nothing needs to be proven, when the accumulation of your life is just what it is, present, human, sufficient. That person exists. They've been under the beliefs this whole time, waiting not to be rescued, not to be fixed, but to be recognized, to be seen by the one person who has been looking everywhere except inward. Here is the beginning of the only useful answer to the question this chapter asks. Nobody told you that you weren't enough. People tried to tell you about their pain, their fear, their need, their wound, and you, because you were young and raw and still forming, translated it. You made it about yourself. That was the only reasonable translation available to you at the time. it was also wrong. And now you're old enough to update the translation. Chapter 4. The performance and the person. There are two of you. This is not a spiritual claim. This is neuroscience, it is psychology, it is the lived experience of every person who has ever walked into a room and become someone slightly different than the person who was in the hallway a moment before. There is the person you perform, and there is the person who performs. The performer has a name, a reputation, a set of skills, a history of wins and losses. The performer knows what to say in interviews, how to be in social situations, which version of the story to tell in which context. The performer is not fake. Do not make that mistake. The performer is real. The performer is you. But the performer is you in a particular mode, a particular register, a particular shape that has been refined over years of learning what the world rewards and what it punishes. And underneath the performer, behind the mode, before the refinement, there is the person. The person doesn't have a polished story. The person has a mess of contradictions, generous and petty at once, confident in some rooms and shaking in others, capable of profound kindness and capable of breathtaking small-mindedness. The person is afraid of things the performer would never admit to. The person wants things the performer considers unworthy of wanting. The person is uncertain about big things, deeply certain about small things, and sometimes has no idea what they're doing. The person is the most real thing about you, and most people, truly most people who are in the process of building what looks like a good life, have almost no relationship with the person. They have an exhaustive, highly optimized relationship with the performer. They know what the performer needs to work on. They know the performer's weaknesses and where they come from, and what habits would fix them. They have goals for the performer, feedback for the performer, rituals designed to make the performer more consistent. The person, meanwhile, sits in the back of the house and has not been visited in years. Here is what happens when you neglect the person. It leaks, not dramatically usually, not in obvious ways. It leaks in the irritability that comes at the end of long stretches of performing well. It leaks in the bizarre flatness you feel on days that should feel triumphant. It leaks in the relationships that remain somehow distant even when everything is fine, because you can only connect as deeply as you've gone into yourself, and you haven't gone very far. It leaks in the Sunday afternoon dread, in the 3 a.m. wakefulness, in the sense that the version of you everyone else knows is a very sophisticated approximation of something realer that you can't quite access. And in the worst cases, not the dramatic crisis cases, but the more insidious ones, it leaks in the complete loss of a sense of what you actually want, separate from what you're supposed to want, separate from what would look good, separate from what would satisfy the people who raised you or impress the people you respect. What you actually want in your actual life, as the actual person. Do you know, if I asked you right now, not the performer, not the version of you who knows the right language for this kind of conversation, but you, the person, what do you actually want from this life? What does it feel like when you imagine the best version of this? What are you actually hungry for? Take a second with that, because here is the thing about self-love that nobody explains clearly enough. It is not an emotion. It is not a feeling you generate by thinking nice thoughts about yourself. It is a relationship, a real one, with a real person. And like all real relationships, it requires you to actually know the other party, their history, their needs, their fears, their honest desires, their contradictions, their beauty, their mess. You cannot love someone you've never met, and you have barely met yourself. The performer you know intimately. You could give a keynote on the performer's strengths and areas for development, but the person, the one underneath, the one in the quiet, the one who exists when the performance stops, you might pass them on the street. What would it take to meet them? The first thing it takes is time without agenda, not meditation necessarily, though that can be one route. Just time where you are not producing, not optimizing, not moving toward anything. Time where you are simply present to whatever arises, thought, feeling, sensation, memory, desire, fear, without immediately trying to manage it or improve it or turn it into something useful. This is extraordinarily uncomfortable for most people, because the arises can include things you've been working hard not to feel. Old grief, genuine loneliness, a rage you've been keeping polite, a love so tender you've been afraid to let yourself fully have it because fully having it means the possibility of losing it. The person is not always pleasant company, they are honest company, and honesty requires a courage the performer often doesn't need because the performer has learned to give the right answer. The person doesn't always know the right answer. The person sometimes knows only the true one. And true, unfiltered, unpolished, belonging only to you, is the only thing that self-love can actually hold. You cannot love a performance. You can admire it. You can optimize it. You can feel proud of it and protect it and mourn it when it fails. But you cannot love it. You can only love what is real. So we need to find what is real. And that starts with a willingness to sit with the person long enough to know them, to let them be complicated, to let them be uncertain, to let them contradict what the performer has been saying about them for years. Because the person has a story, and it is not the story the performer tells. Chapter 5. What you call self-improvement and what it might actually be. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What are you improving yourself toward? Not the goal. I know the goal. Everybody has the goal. The goal is a better job, a stronger body, a sharper mind, deeper relationships, more financial security, more peace, more presence, more something. The goal is always more, and the goal is fine. The goal is often real and legitimate and worth working toward. But the question I'm asking is more fundamental than the goal. What are you improving yourself toward? What is the destination underneath the destination? If you achieved all of it, the body, the security, the presence, the peace, what would you be allowed to finally do? What would you be allowed to finally be? What version of yourself would be permitted to exist once all the improving was finished? Because here is what I've noticed. Working with people across many years of their lives, the improving never finishes. Not because people fail to make progress. Many of them make extraordinary progress. They get stronger and more disciplined and more emotionally intelligent and more successful by almost every measure. But the improvements never produce the thing they were always secretly pointing toward, the permission to be enough, the arrival at a self they can finally accept without conditions, because the conditions keep moving. When the body is better, the mind needs work. When the mind is sharper, the relationship needs attention. When the relationship is good, the career needs a level up. When the career is thriving, the spiritual life feels shallow. There is always something that needs to be fixed before the person at the center of all the fixing gets to rest. This is not ambition. I want to be very clear about that, because this chapter could easily be misread as an argument against ambition, against growth, against becoming more. It is not. Ambition is one of the most beautiful things a human being can have. The drive to expand, to deepen, to become more capable and more useful and more alive. That is not the problem. The problem is ambition used as a hiding place. The problem is growth as a way of avoiding arrival. The problem is I'll love myself when, as a philosophy, a permanent deferral, a life sentence served in the service of a future self who will never quite materialize because the moment he does, there will already be a better version of him outlined on the whiteboard. And the person doing all this improving, the actual living, breathing, struggling human being doing it, is not in the future. They are here, now, in this body, in this moment, with this history and these wounds and these gifts that they keep treating as raw material rather than as the thing itself. You are not raw material. You are not a work in progress in the sense that a work in progress is incomplete. You are a work in progress in the sense that all living things are changing, evolving, sometimes moving forward and sometimes moving sideways, but never incomplete, never unworthy of the basic regard you would give a person you loved. Here is a test I want you to take. Think of someone you love, really love, not abstractly, but actually. A child, a parent, a friend, a partner. Someone whose presence in your life is not conditional on their performance, Someone you would show up for on their worst day, not because they earned it, but because loving them is part of who you are. Now, how do you talk to that person when they fail? Do you tell them they're not enough yet? Do you catalog their shortcomings with clinical precision? Do you refuse to allow them comfort or rest until they've fixed what's broken? Do you speak to them with the voice you use on yourself when you've missed a goal, made a mistake, fallen short of what you thought you should be? If you answered yes to those questions, you are a cruel friend and you should be ashamed of yourself. Of course you didn't answer yes, because you are not cruel, because you know that love doesn't work like that, because you understand, with anyone else, that the cruelty of conditional regard, love that is withheld until performance improves, is not motivation, it is damage. But you use it on yourself every single day, and you call it self-improvement. The actual definition of self-improvement, the one that produces real, sustainable, life-altering change, rather than the anxious, exhausting, hamster wheel version, is change that comes from love, not from contempt. It is the kind of change a good parent encourages in a child, not because the child is currently inadequate, but because the child is already precious and deserving of every good thing, and growth is how the precious thing becomes more fully itself. That is a completely different energy. You can feel the difference if you tune into it right now. The contempt-driven version feels like an engine that runs on shame. The love-driven version feels like a tree growing toward light. Both produce movement. One of them produces it at enormous psychological cost, and one of them produces it as a natural consequence of being alive and nurtured and believing that you deserve to take up space. Which one have you been running on? And more importantly, do you know how to change the fuel? That change is not an instruction you can follow. It is not a habit you can add to the morning routine. It is a shift in the most fundamental story you are telling about yourself, whether you are already worthy of your own care, or whether your worthiness is something you are still working to earn. The chapters ahead are going to help you make that shift. But first, you have to see the current story clearly. You have to look at what you call self-improvement and ask, honestly, without defensiveness, whether it is love in action or whether it is fear in a performance costume. That question alone, held with honesty, is the beginning. Chapter 6, the secret chapter. What happens in the room where no one is watching? Stop. Don't read ahead yet. I need to ask you to do something that might feel strange for a moment. Close your eyes. When you're ready, not yet. And think about the last time you were completely alone. Not just physically alone, actually alone, in the way that means no audience, not even the internal audience, the part of you narrating and evaluating and performing for the imagined eyes of people who matter to you. Just no one, nothing to prove, nothing to manage, the most private version of the most private room. Who are you in that room? Now open them, because I want to talk to that person, not the one who's been impressive lately, not the one working on their habits, the one in the room when the door is shut and the performance is offline and there is no version of the story that needs to be maintained. Most self-help reaches you through the performer. It speaks to your goals, your discipline, your capacity for change. And that is not wrong, but it will always have a ceiling, because the performer is a managed thing, and managed things can only change as far as the management allows. The person in the room, the unmanaged one, is where the real transformation happens. And the real transformation doesn't look like improvement. It looks like recognition. I want you to think about something you have never told anyone, not a secret in the dramatic sense, not a confession, something simpler and more intimate than that, something you feel or believe or quietly carry that you have never once put into words for another human being, not because it's shameful, because it is yours. Because there is a part of you that has learned to keep the most real things private, not out of fear of judgment, but out of a deeper, stranger instinct, the instinct to protect the self that's too real to perform. That part of you is not broken. That part of you is the most intact thing about you. Here is the secret inside the secret chapter. Every person, every single person, regardless of how confident or successful or evolved they appear, has a version of themselves that lives only in private, a self that is more tender, more confused, more frightened, more hopeful than the self that moves through the world. And the degree to which that private self is loved, accepted, known, the degree to which you have genuinely befriended the person in the room, is the degree to which you are actually truly in any meaningful sense living your life, not performing it, living it. The reason this is the secret chapter, the reason I've placed it here, in the middle, where you might not have been expecting it, is because the middle is where people lose the thread. The beginning is exciting, the ending is inspiring. The middle is where you find out whether the thing you're reading is real, or whether it's just another well-arranged set of ideas that sounds good, but doesn't actually ask anything of you. This chapter is asking something of you. I want you to write something down. Not in a journal, not formally, on anything. The margin of this page, a receipt, the Notes app on your phone. Something you have never admitted, not because it would damage you to say it, but because it is true and you have been carrying it alone. It might be something like, I am tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, or I don't actually know what I want, or I think I've been performing happiness for so long I can't locate the real thing, or I miss a version of myself that existed before I learned to be this good at being this person, or I am afraid that if I ever stopped working this hard, I would find out that there is nothing underneath the work. Whatever it is that lives in the room when no one is watching, write it, not for me, not for any eventual insight it might produce, just as an act of acknowledgement, as a way of saying to the person in the room, I see you, I know you're there. You don't have to stay hidden just because the world is more comfortable with the performer. That act of acknowledgement, small, private, quiet, is more radical than any goal you have ever set. Because every goal you have ever set was addressed to the performer. This is addressed to the person, and when the person is seen, really seen, not managed, not improved, not assessed, but genuinely witnessed, even if only by themselves, something happens that is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. The glass between you and your life starts to thin, not all at once, not dramatically, but the flatness, the kind that Marcus had, the kind that lives underneath achievement and productivity and all the right habits, starts to lift, not because you fixed something, because you stopped looking away from something. You turned toward the room, and the person in the room turned back. That's the secret, not a technique, not a framework, just the ancient, irreducible fact that being known, even by yourself, especially by yourself, is the thing the soul has always been trying to arrange. Every relationship you've pursued, every accomplishment you've aimed for, every version of yourself you've tried to become, underneath all of it was this, the wish to be known, to be real, to exist not just in the world's perception of you, but in your own. You are allowed to exist in your own. You always were. Chapter 7. The specific ways you abandon yourself. Let's get precise. Self-abandonment is not an abstraction. It is not a philosophical concept. It is a set of specific, concrete, daily behaviors that you may not be recognizing as abandonment because they feel like something else. They feel like practicality, or kindness, or maturity, or strength. They are not those things. They are the ways you leave yourself to manage a world that sometimes feels easier to navigate without you in it. Here is what self-abandonment looks like in practice. It looks like saying yes when you mean no, and then spending hours or days processing a low-level resentment you can't quite name because you don't want to acknowledge that you traded your honesty for someone else's comfort. It looks like editing your opinion before you speak it, not because you're reconsidering, but because you already know what the other person wants to hear and you've decided their comfort is more important than your truth. It looks like minimizing your pain in conversations with people who can handle it because you've decided their capacity for your difficulty is more important than the difficulty's actual existence. It looks like the apology you give before stating a need. It looks like the laugh you produce when something isn't funny. It looks like the enthusiasm you perform for a plan you have reservations about, because the reservations would require a conversation, and the conversation might produce conflict, and conflict, you have learned, means losing something. It looks like never finishing the thing that is actually yours, the project, the book, the course, the art, the idea, the thing that came from the deepest part of you, and therefore feels most exposed, and therefore has been sitting in a drawer, or a file, or a back corner of your mind for years, being fed just enough attention to keep it from dying, but not enough to let it live. Because finishing it would mean showing it to the world, and showing it to the world would mean showing yourself to the world, and you have learnt, somewhere along the way, that yourself is not entirely safe to show. It looks like the way you treat your own time. This one is subtle and important. Look at how you spend the hours that are actually yours, not the hours that belong to work, to other people, to obligations you've accumulated, the hours that are genuinely, legitimately yours to fill as the person you actually are. What do you do with them? Do you spend them? Do you hoard them? Do you fill them so quickly with productivity or consumption or noise that you never have to actually inhabit them? Because time that belongs to you is, in a sense, you asking you how you want to be. And many people find that question so uncomfortable that they answer it by eliminating the question, by making sure there is always something to be done, always somewhere to be, always a reason why the hour that was yours has now become someone else's. That is not a schedule. That is a flight pattern. It looks like the way you handle your own emotions. Specifically, what do you do with the ones that are inconvenient? The grief that doesn't fit the timeline you've allowed for it. The anger that feels disproportionate or unbecoming or too much. The joy that makes you nervous because having it means being able to lose it. The loneliness that you'd prefer not to examine too closely because examining it might mean acknowledging something uncomfortable about the shape of your current life. Do you feel them or do you manage them? Because there is a profound difference between those two things, and most people who pride themselves on emotional intelligence are actually practicing emotional management, which is a useful skill genuinely and has its place, but is not the same as emotional residence, as actually living in what you feel, moving through it at its actual pace, rather than processing it at the pace your cognitive mind has decided is appropriate. Feeling is slower than managing. That's the part nobody tells you. Real grief takes longer than we want it to. Real anger has a heat that lasts past our comfort with it. Real loneliness, when you actually stop running and turn around and face it, can be enormous, and the impulse to manage it, to understand it, to fix it, to turn it into something useful, is often just another version of leaving, of abandoning the person in the room for the performance of processing. Abandoning yourself also looks like the standards you keep for yourself versus others. Think about the last mistake you made, something you genuinely got wrong, a decision, an interaction, a choice. Now think about how you treated yourself afterward, the internal monologue, the duration of it, the severity. Now ask yourself, if a person you loved made that exact mistake, would you treat them the way you treated you? If not, and for most people the answer is not, then you are operating by a double standard that you would recognize as cruelty if you applied it to anyone other than yourself, and you are doing it so consistently that it doesn't feel like cruelty anymore. It feels like standards. It feels like the appropriate cost of imperfection. It feels like what a serious, self-aware person does. It is not. It is the most intimate form of violence most people ever experience, and the person perpetrating it is also the person experiencing it, and that is why it is so hard to stop. Because stopping requires something counterintuitive. It requires you to treat yourself the way you'd treat someone you love, even when you feel like you don't deserve it. Especially when you feel like you don't deserve it, because the feeling that you don't deserve it is precisely the self-abandonment. That is the moment the abandonment is asking you to agree with it, to co-sign it, to make it permanent. You are allowed to disagree, not by arguing with the voice, not by positive affirming your way past it, by simply deciding quietly in the room that the standard you apply to yourself is going to match the standard you'd apply to someone you love. Every time, not when you've earned it, not when you've improved enough to merit it. Now, today, as you are. Chapter 8. What loving yourself actually looks like. This is the chapter where I have to be very careful, because the phrase self-love has been turned into something so saccharine, so spa-day, so aesthetically pleasant and culturally safe that it has lost almost all of its meaning. It has become face masks and affirmations and treating yourself, and very little to do with the difficult, sometimes brutal, always honest work of actually building a functioning relationship with the person you are. So let me tell you what it actually looks like. Self-love looks like keeping promises to yourself. Small ones, the ones no one else will hold you to, which means the ones only you will know you broke. When you say you're going to sleep by 11, and the scroll is easier than the boundary, and no one in the world will know if you stay up until 1, who you are in that moment, who you choose to be, is a direct statement of whether you take yourself seriously, not because sleep is morality, because the pattern of breaking promises to yourself is a pattern of communicating to the deepest part of you that your word to yourself carries less weight than your word to others. And the deepest part of you is listening. Self-love looks like telling the truth in conversations where lying would be easier. Not confrontational truth, not truth as a weapon, or truth as performance. Quiet truth, the kind where you say, I'm not okay right now, actually, instead of fine. The kind where you say, I don't want to do that, instead of an excuse. The kind where you say, I need something different in this relationship, instead of absorbing the difference silently and calling it flexibility. The truth, said kindly to people who matter to you, is an act of self-love. Because every time you swallow the truth, you teach yourself that what you actually think and feel and need is not safe to exist in the world, and you are the one who has to live with that lesson. Self-love looks like protecting your energy without apologizing for it. Here is a thing that takes longer to learn than it should. Some people leave you fuller than they found you, and some people leave you emptier, and neither category is a moral judgment about them or about you. It is just a fact. And learning to spend more time with the first category and less with the second is not selfishness. It is one of the most loving things you can do for yourself and, quietly, for them, because when you are depleted, you cannot give the best of what you have to anyone. This includes saying no, actually saying it. Not hedging, not managing, not maybe next timing your way out of something you genuinely do not want to do. Actually saying, I can't do that, or I don't want to do that, and then sitting with the discomfort of someone else's possible disappointment without immediately filling the discomfort with an explanation or an alternative or a promise to make it up later. The no is the love, not the explanation. The no. Self-love looks like allowing yourself to be seen imperfectly. This is the one that most people with high standards find hardest. The ones who have built an identity around competence, around reliability, around being the kind of person who handles things. Allowing yourself to be seen struggling, not in a curated way, not in the narrative arc of someone who has already learned the lesson, but in the actual middle of it, uncertain and unfinished and visibly not fine, is an act of extraordinary self-love. Because it means you've decided that your real experience is more worth honoring than the impression you're managing. Self-love looks like rest you don't have to earn. This one is almost political in how countercultural it is. Rest that is not a reward. Rest that is not strategic recovery in the service of future productivity. Rest that is simply rest. The body and mind being allowed to be quiet, not because they've earned it, but because they are alive, and alive things need stillness, and the living of a life is sufficient reason to be allowed to pause in it. Most people cannot rest this way. Most people, if they rest without earning it, feel the guilt within minutes. The productive thing that should be happening, the time that is being wasted, the version of themselves that would be doing something with these hours. The guilt is the voice of the system that has convinced you that your value is your output, and the rest is you choosing, for a moment, not to agree. The rest is the revolution. Self-love looks like curiosity about yourself, rather than judgment. When something doesn't work, a reaction that surprised you, a pattern that repeated despite your best intentions, a feeling you didn't expect to have, there are two ways to respond. Judgment. What is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? I should be further along. Or curiosity. That's interesting. What is that about? What is the part of me that's still running that old software? What does it need? Judgment produces shame. Curiosity produces understanding, and understanding, held gently, held consistently, held even when it's inconvenient, is the only real basis for lasting change. Not willpower, not discipline, not the punishment of shame. Understanding, the kind that comes from treating yourself the way you'd treat someone you are genuinely trying to know. This is not passive. It does not mean accepting every behavior. It means investigating before convicting. It means asking what is happening before asking what is wrong with me. It means giving yourself the kind of attention you'd give to a mystery you're interested in solving, rather than a crime you're committed to punishing. Self-love, at its most practical, most useful, most real, looks like being on your own side. Not blindly, not defensively. On your own side the way a good coach is on the athlete's side. Seeing clearly, speaking honestly, celebrating what is working, addressing what isn't, but always, always from a fundamental position of wanting the person to succeed, of believing in the person's capacity, of treating the person's well-being as worth investing in, regardless of the current scoreboard. You deserve that from yourself. You have always deserved it. The rest of these chapters are about building it. Chapter 9. The relationships that reflect you back. You cannot fully separate the relationship you have with yourself from the relationships you have with other people. They are not parallel. They are intertwined. The way you love yourself sets a kind of floor for how you allow others to treat you. The way others treat you over time shapes what you believe about your own value. And the conversations you are able to have with other people, how deep they go, how honest they get, how real the connection becomes, is in direct proportion to how well you know the person you're bringing to the conversation. If you don't know yourself, you can't show yourself. And if you can't show yourself, what you have is not a relationship. It is two performances sharing a space. I want to talk about 3 specific kinds of relationships and what they reveal. The first is the relationship with someone you keep longer than you should. You know the one, maybe more than one. The friendship that has become mostly history, shared references and an old warmth and the familiarity of someone who knew you before. But when you try to bring your current self to it, the whole self, the one with the new thinking and the changing values and the questions you're actually carrying, there is a mismatch. The conversation goes to where it always goes. The roles are set. You are who you were to each other a decade ago, and neither of you has said out loud that you have both become different people who might, if you met now, not naturally reach for each other. The reason you keep these relationships is complicated. Loyalty, history, fear of loss, the genuine love that is still there, but underneath the keeping sometimes is a quieter reason. The old relationship requires less of you. The person in it knows the old performer. They don't expect the new complexity, and the new complexity, the growth, the questioning, the becoming, requires you to be willing to bring yourself somewhere that might not have space for you. Choosing to show up as you actually are in a relationship that was built around an older version is an act of self-love, even if it is uncomfortable, even if it changes things, especially if it changes things. The second relationship I want to talk about is the one where you are always giving. There are relationships where you are the support, the resource, the one who holds, the one who helps. And there is enormous love in those relationships and enormous meaning, and you value them deeply. But I want you to notice whether you are ever, in any of those relationships, the one who asks for support, the one who takes the resource, the one who is held. If not, why not? Is it that there is no space? Or is it that you have not created the space, that you have perhaps preferred the identity of the one who gives because the one who receives feels more vulnerable? because receiving requires you to be seen in your need, and your need feels less safe to show than your strength. Relationships where you give but never receive are not relationships. They are performances of loving in which you remain invisible. And you have allowed that because invisibility for many people feels safer than the exposure of being known. But invisible is not safe. Invisible is just lonely in a room full of people. The third relationship is the one you most want but haven't fully allowed. The one where you want to be known all the way, where you want to be seen in the complicated parts, the contradictory parts, the parts that don't fit neatly into the story you tell about yourself, where you want the other person to know the person in the room, not just the performer in the hallway. That relationship, or the potential of it, may already exist in your life. There may already be someone who has been offering you that level of seeing, and you have been accepting only the parts that felt safe. Or it may be a relationship you haven't yet allowed because the full knowing feel requires a level of self-revelation you haven't yet been willing to practice. In either case, the work is the same, and the work is internal before it is relational. You cannot let someone know you if you don't know yourself. You cannot offer the full person if you haven't met the full person. You cannot receive the depth of love you're capable of being held in if you haven't decided that the full depth of yourself is worth holding. The relationships in your life are not just connections, they are mirrors, and the mirror shows you what you believe about yourself. If you look at the relationships in your life and see only the surface, pleasant, functional, managed, warm, but somehow not quite reaching, the question to ask is not what is wrong with my relationships. The question is, how deep am I willing to go into myself? Because that is the depth your relationships will follow. Every time. Chapter 10. The grief nobody tells you to do. This chapter is going to be different. This chapter is not about becoming. It is not about improving or building or moving toward. It is about something that most personal development absolutely refuses to address, because personal development is built on the premise that the way forward is always forward, that growth is always progress, that the past is a source of lessons and not a source of losses. But some of what is between you and a full life is not a habit that needs to change. Some of it is grief that has never been allowed to complete. You have lost things, not just the big losses, the ones with funerals and names and formal periods of mourning, the quiet losses, the ones the world didn't stop for, the version of yourself you were before something happened that changed you. The relationship that ended not with drama but with a slow fade that was somehow worse because you never got to have it be over. The dream you held for years and then let go of so quietly that you almost didn't notice, until one day you noticed that you didn't think about it anymore and you couldn't quite tell if that was acceptance or defeat. The childhood that was good in some ways and complicated in others and now exists in you as a mixture of warmth and something else. Something that doesn't have a clear name, something that sits between love and mourning, and the specific ache of having grown up and discovered that the people who were supposed to protect you were doing the best they could and the best they could wasn't always enough. You are allowed to grieve that, not to punish anyone, not to stay in it, just to do it, to give it the space it actually requires rather than the space the timeline of productivity allows. Because ungrieved losses don't disappear, they go underground. They become the flatness underneath achievement. They become the glass between you and your life. They become the inexplicable heaviness that arrives without context on an ordinary Tuesday. They become the strange sadness that sometimes surfaces in the middle of something good. The sadness that is trying to tell you something you've been too busy to hear. There is a particular loss I want to name specifically. The loss of the self you were before you learned to perform. Every person who has spent years building a persona, building the professional self, the competent self, the together self, the one who handles things, has at some point set down a version of themselves who was less managed and more alive, messier, more spontaneous, less effective, more present, the self who cried when it needed to and laughed without thinking about how it sounded and didn't know yet what the world expected and so just showed up as what it was. Somewhere in the becoming competent and reliable and good at living a life, Something of that self got left behind, and grieving it, not to return to it, which is impossible, but to honor the loss of it, to acknowledge that something real was traded for something also real, that the trade was sometimes worth it and sometimes not, and that both of those truths can exist at once, that grief is part of the work of coming home to yourself. You are allowed to mourn the years you spent waiting to be enough. You are allowed to mourn the relationships that couldn't hold you because you hadn't yet decided you were worth holding. You are allowed to mourn the version of your life that might have existed if you had found this understanding earlier, and then to set that mourning down, because the version that exists now is the only one available, and it is more alive with possibility than you might currently be willing to believe. Grief, when it is actually grieved, when it is felt rather than managed, when it is moved through rather than avoided, does something remarkable. It creates space, the space that was being occupied by the underground loss, by the managed emotion, by the feeling that was always half present at the edge of things, becomes available for something else, for presence, for openness, for the kind of joy that is not a spike of dopamine, but a more durable, quiet, bone-deep experience of being alive and knowing it, and not being terrified by the knowing. This is not a small thing. This is in fact the thing. The capacity to let life actually land, to feel the good things as good, to receive what is offered, to be here rather than a few inches behind your own eyes. That capacity opens most fully when the grief has been done, when you've made peace with what was lost, when you've stopped needing to carry it covertly because you've allowed yourself to carry it openly. If you are reading this and feeling something stir, some recognition that there is grief you haven't finished, I want you to know that feeling is not a problem. It is an invitation, and the person waiting on the other side of that grief is not a sadder version of you. It is a freer one. Chapter 11. The body remembers what the mind forgets. You are not a mind with a body attached. You are a body that has a mind. And the distinction matters more than most people realize, because almost everything we think of as psychological, our moods, our patterns, our sense of safety, our capacity for pleasure, is not purely cognitive, it is somatic. It lives in tissue and fascia, and the vagus nerve and the breath, and the jaw, and the shoulders, and the particular way you hold yourself when you are waiting for something bad to happen. The body is not a metaphor. When I say the body remembers what the mind forgets, I mean this literally. The autonomic nervous system is not rational. It does not respond to your understanding of why something is not a threat. It responds to signals from the environment that match. In some frequency the mind cannot always decode, the frequency of times when things were not safe, and it responds to those signals with chemistry, with cortisol and adrenaline, and the particular constellation of physical sensations that we call anxiety, or dread, or the low-grade hypervigilance that makes ordinary days feel like a constant minor emergency. You may have worked through the story of something that happened to you. You may have understood it, contextualized it, forgiven it, integrated it into a narrative about who you are and how you got here. And the work of understanding is real, and it matters, and it is not nothing. But the work of understanding is cognitive, and the body, which doesn't speak in concepts, which speaks in sensation and impulse, and the tightness across the chest, when a certain kind of tone enters a conversation, the body may still be running an older program. The older program is not a flaw. It was written for survival, but living inside a survival program, in a life that is not actually dangerous, is its own particular kind of suffering. The chronic background tension, the difficulty fully relaxing into pleasure because the nervous system is still monitoring for what might go wrong, the way connection can feel unsafe even when it is good, the way success can feel precarious even when it is earned, the way peace, when it arrives, is immediately suspect. The survival program says, stay alert. The life you are trying to build says, it is safe to land. The body is the bridge. And loving yourself, not the concept of yourself, not the idea of yourself, but the actual embodied person you are, means bringing the same attention and care and curiosity to your physical existence that you're learning to bring to your internal one. What does your body feel right now? Not as an exercise, not as a scan for problems, as a genuine inquiry into what it's like to be you physically in this moment. Where are you holding tension you didn't know you were holding? Where are you braced? What does your breath feel like? Where does it end? Is it shallow, using only the top third of the lungs? What would happen if you let it go deeper? For many people, the answer to that last question is something would feel exposed. And that feeling, the exposure that comes from breathing fully, from letting the body open, from relaxing the bracing, is actually the feeling of becoming present. And presence feels vulnerable to a nervous system that has learned to keep its guard up. Learning to inhabit your body is, in the most practical sense, learning to tolerate presence, learning to let the now be enough. Not as a concept, but as a physical experience, the actual sensation of being in your life, rather than managing it from a slight distance. The practices that help with this are numerous and well documented: movement, breathwork, somatic therapy, even the simple discipline of walking slowly and feeling the ground, of eating without a screen and actually tasting the food, of lying in the dark before sleep and making contact with the full weight of your own body against the surface that holds it. These are not luxuries. They are the difference between visiting your life and living it. The body also holds joy. This is the part we forget when we focus on the body as a site of trauma or tension or old programs. The body is the only place joy happens. The mind can conceptualize joy. The body experiences it. The warmth in the chest when you see someone you love. The particular expansion of the lungs when you laugh in a way that surprises you. The animal pleasure of sun on skin, of cool water, of the specific silence that follows music that has genuinely moved you. These things require a body that is present enough to receive them, and receiving them, allowing them to actually land rather than observing them from behind the glass, is not automatic. For many people who have spent years in some version of survival mode, receiving pleasure requires practice, requires permission, requires the willingness to stop, to actually feel the good thing, to resist the impulse to immediately move on to the next thing. The good thing, when you let it land, is enormous. You have been letting it pass by. Chapter 12. Building the life that comes from the inside out. Everything we have covered in this book so far has been moving toward this, not a destination you will one day arrive at, a direction, an orientation, a way of being in relation to your own life that is fundamentally different from the way most people have been taught to build their lives, which is from the outside in. Outside in, I will achieve the thing, and the achievement will make me feel worthy. I will get the approval, and the approval will make me feel loved. I will build the life that looks right, and looking right will make me feel like I am right. I will become the person the world respects, and their respect will fill the place inside me that currently feels like it is not quite full. This approach does not fail because the achievements are wrong. It fails because it has the causality backwards. The internal state, the sense of worthiness, the experience of love, the sense of rightness, the fullness, is not the output of the external achievement. It is the condition from which the external achievement becomes possible in its truest form. Let me say that again, because it is the most important sentence in this book. The internal state is not the output. It is the input. The life built from the outside in is always slightly hollow at the center, because the center was waiting for the outside to fill it. And the outside never can, because that is not its function. The outside reflects the inside. It amplifies, it responds, it provides texture and context and the specific friction of reality. But it does not generate meaning. Meaning is generated inside, and then it goes out into the world and shapes what you build there. The life built from the inside out feels different, not easier, not necessarily more successful by external measures, though it often is, because when you are building from a place of genuine care for yourself, you make better decisions, attract more genuine connections, and pursue things that actually match who you are, rather than who you think you should be. But the primary difference is not in the outcomes. The primary difference is in the texture of the experience. It feels like yours, like you are actually in it, not watching it, not managing it, not measuring it against some external standard of sufficient, just in it, present, engaged, sometimes struggling, sometimes thriving, but always fundamentally here. Building from the inside out starts with the question you may have been avoiding. What do I actually want? Not what should I want? Not what would impress the people I respect. Not what would make someone who didn't believe in me realize they were wrong. Not what would make the past make more sense, or the wound more worth it, or the sacrifice more justified. What do I, the person in the room, the person underneath the performance, the person who exists in the quiet and knows things the performer doesn't, what do I actually want? This question is harder than it sounds for two reasons. The first is that the wanting has been trained out of many people. You wanted things as a child and were told the wanting was too big or impractical or selfish or dangerous. You learned to want smaller or to want the right things or to stop wanting loudly. And the quiet that followed wasn't peace. It was a kind of amputated hunger that still aches at the sight of the removal. The second reason is that genuine wanting is terrifying because genuine wanting requires genuine commitment. If you know what you actually want, you are responsible for moving toward it. And if you move toward it and don't get it, the loss is real in a way that the loss of a performance want never is. When you're chasing something you're supposed to want, losing it is disappointing. When you're chasing something you actually want, with your whole heart, with the full investment of the real you, losing it is grief. Most people would rather not want the thing than risk the grief. But here is what that choice costs. It costs the life, not dramatically, not in one moment of clear sacrifice. It costs it slowly, in the accumulation of safe choices that produce a safe, hollow result. In the years spent in the right direction for the wrong reasons, in the strange emptiness that persists even when the scoreboard says you should be satisfied. The wanting is not the danger. The wanting is the life itself. And building from the inside out means picking it up. The real wanting, holding it with both hands, being willing to grieve if it doesn't come, and willing to receive it if it does. Being willing to be the kind of person who wants things for real and lives toward them for real, and is willing to be seen doing it. That is the life that comes from the inside out. That is what all of this has been building toward, and you are already capable of it. You always were. Chapter 13. The person you will be when you stop running. I want to tell you what happens, not as a promise, not as a guarantee, as a description of what tends to become available when a person finally, genuinely stops running from themselves. The running looks different for everyone. For some people it's the constant productivity. For some it's the social calendar that never allows for an empty evening. For some it's the self-improvement regimen that has become so dense it leaves no room for the self it's supposedly improving. For some it's the relationship chaos, the moving from one intensity to the next so that the quiet never quite settles. For some it's just the phone, the endless, innocent, devastating phone. Whatever the particular shape of your running, when you stop, here is what tends to happen. There is at first a discomfort, a restlessness that is not boredom but is often mistaken for boredom, a sense of wrongness, of something that should be happening not happening, an urgency without an object. This is the nervous system processing the absence of its usual input. This is the withdrawal of a kind, and it passes, not quickly, not in one afternoon of stillness, but it passes. And then there is an encounter with what was underneath the running. Sometimes this is the grief we talked about in Chapter 10. Sometimes it is a fear, a specific one that turns out to be manageable, much more manageable than the running that was keeping it at bay. Sometimes it is a desire so deep and so real and so long suppressed that meeting it is almost physically overwhelming. Sometimes it is simply quiet, the extraordinary, unfamiliar experience of existing without agenda, without performance, without a next thing to move toward. In that quiet, something becomes available that cannot be accessed from the running. You begin to hear yourself, not the voice that has been running the performance, not the internal critic or the life planner or the narrator of your own story, the quieter signal underneath, the one that knows what you actually think, what you actually feel, what actually matters to you versus what you've been told matters to you, the one that has been transmitting steadily, reliably all this time, but that has been drowned out by the noise of the running. When you begin to hear it, you begin to make different choices, not dramatic ones usually. The changes that come from genuine self-knowledge tend to be quieter than people expect. You begin to say no to things that used to feel obligatory. You begin to say yes to things that used to feel too indulgent, too exposed, too much your own. You begin to spend time differently. Not more productively, not less, just differently. In alignment with what you actually need and want, rather than what the performance requires. Your relationships change, the ones built on your accommodating, your performing, your managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own. Some of those will strain, not all of them, but some. And the straining, while it is painful, is also information. It is the relationship showing you what it was actually built on. And you will have to decide with each one whether what remains after the performance is removed is something worth investing in, or whether the relationship was always really a transaction and the transaction no longer serves you. The relationships that remain and deepen and become more real, those will feel like something you haven't experienced before, or like something you experienced very briefly in childhood before you learned to protect yourself. The feeling of being actually known, of not having to work hard to belong, of arriving exactly as you are and finding that the person on the other side was waiting for this version, not the managed one. Your ambitions change shape, not in scale necessarily. You may still want big things, still pursue extraordinary outcomes, but the quality of the wanting shifts. It becomes more specific, more personal, less about the external validation and more about the internal experience of doing the thing. The achievement begins to feel like an expression of self rather than a proof of self. And when that shift happens, the doing of it, the actual daily work of building towards something, becomes something different. It becomes something you can actually feel, and you begin to notice the small things. This sounds minor. It is not minor. The small things, the specific quality of afternoon light, the particular warmth of a conversation with someone who knows you, the satisfaction in a body that is moving and fed and rested, the pleasure of a sentence that is exactly right. These things have always been there. You have been moving too fast to receive them. When you stop running, you begin to receive them, and the accumulation of received small things, the ordinary beauty of an ordinary day met with actual presence rather than a managed glance, is not a small life. It is a full one, fuller than anything the running was moving toward. And here is the most astonishing thing, the version of you that shows up when you stop running. The one that is quieter, more honest, less defended, more real, is not weaker than the performer. It is more powerful because it is no longer spending its energy on the management. All the energy that went into the performance, the maintenance of the persona, the monitoring of how you're being perceived, the constant internal negotiation between who you are and who you're presenting, all of that energy becomes available for the actual living of your actual life. That is an enormous resource. You have been spending it on the running. Now imagine having it back. Chapter 14, the last thing and the most true one. We have come a long way together. I want to sit here for a moment before the ending, not because I'm stalling, because endings for a book like this are not conclusions, they're thresholds. And I want you to feel the threshold before you cross it. You came to this book with something. Maybe you knew what it was when you began. Maybe you didn't quite. Maybe you just knew there was a flatness you couldn't account for, or a longing you couldn't name, or a sense that the life you were building was slightly less yours than it was supposed to be. And we've walked through a lot of rooms together. We've looked at the drug of external happiness and the architecture of the self, and the specific ways we leave ourselves, and the grief we never finished, and the body that holds what the mind tries to manage. We've talked about relationships as mirrors and self-love as practice and the life built from the inside out and what becomes available when the running stops. And now we're here, at the last chapter, the most important one I said at the beginning along with the first, and I meant it. Here is why the last chapter is the hardest and the truest, and the one that will stay with you longest. Because the last chapter is not about what you've learned, it's about what you're going to do with it. This is the place where most people put the book down and feel good about having read it, and return to the life they were already living with a slight upgrade in vocabulary and a collection of insights that will eventually dissolve back into the texture of ordinary days. Not because the book wasn't real, because reading is passive and life is not. I don't want that for you. So let me say what needs to be said as clearly and as directly as I know how. You are not a project. You are not a self that needs to be built or improved or finally achieved. You are a person who is already here, already real, already containing everything that the life you want is going to require. The becoming that matters is not becoming something other than what you are. It is becoming more fully what you already are. Peeling back the performance, the running, the management, the survival programs, the self-abandonment, the waiting for permission, and finding underneath all of that the person who was always there, intact, sufficient, worth loving. That person is not perfect. That person makes mistakes and has contradictions and is sometimes afraid and sometimes petty and sometimes wrong about things that matter. That person has parts that still need growing and wounds that are still healing and desires that are still being discovered. That person is not finished, but that person is not a work in progress in the sense of something incomplete. That person is a life in progress in the sense of something alive, and alive things do not have to earn the right to their own existence. Alive things exist. That is the whole thing. That is the complete credential. You exist. You are here. And here is the most true thing I know, the thing I want to leave you with, the thing I would want you to carry when this is over and the next day comes and the ordinary life reasserts itself with its demands and its distractions and its thousand ways of pulling you back into the performance. The love you've been chasing, the love that was supposed to come when you were finally enough, when the achievement was sufficient, when the version of you you'd been building was complete enough to deserve it. That love is not somewhere ahead of you. It is not at the finish line. It is not in the next accomplishment, or the next relationship, or the next morning routine, or the next better version of the plan. It is here. It is available right now, in this moment, to the person you actually are, as you actually are, without amendment, without prerequisite, without the performance. You are the one you've been waiting for, not as a slogan, not as a motivational phrase to put on a wall, as the single most practical, most structural, most life-altering fact available to you, the thing you've been looking for in every achievement and every relationship and every version of the better self you've been building. It was you. The encounter with the self that you've been arranging through the elaborate architecture of an entire life was always available without the architecture. You, seen, known, met with honesty and held with kindness and invested in, not because you've earned it, but because you are alive and you are real, and your being here matters in ways that are not measured by anything you have produced. This is not the end of the work. The work continues. The habits, the honesty, the grief, the kept promises, the boundaries, the returning again and again to the person in the room. That work doesn't stop at the last chapter. That work is the rest of the life. But the premise of the work changes. You are no longer improving yourself toward worthiness. You are living from worthiness, not earned, not achieved, not conditional on how today goes or how far you've come, or how close you are to the version of yourself you once decided you needed to become. Given, present, here. You are here, and you are enough, not at the finish line. Now, right now. This is not an ending. This is the beginning of the life that was always waiting for you to stop running long enough to let it begin. Go begin it. You already know the way in. You have always known you are the way in. Viral SEO kit. Optimize title. Stop chasing happiness like a drug. Start loving yourself like your life depends on it. Full audiobook. Short description, 150 characters. You've been chasing happiness in all the wrong places. This audiobook changes everything. Start loving yourself like your life depends on it. Long description. You've done everything right. The goals, the habits, the self-improvement, the routines. And yet, underneath it all, there's still that quiet ache, that flatness, that feeling like you're watching your own life from behind glass. This isn't a motivation problem. This is a self-relationship problem. In this full-length audiobook, we go into the rooms most self-help refuses to enter, the rooms where your real self lives, not the performer, not the optimized version, but the actual, complicated, worthy human being underneath all the doing. What you'll discover inside, why happiness is wired like a drug, and how to break the cycle, the specific ways you abandon yourself every single day and don't realize it, what self-love actually looks like versus what you've been told it is, the grief you were never given permission to finish, how to build a life from the inside out, not the other way around. The secret chapter that changes the whole conversation. What becomes available when you finally stop running from yourself. This is not motivation. This is transformation. 14 chapters. One of them will stop you in your tracks. The first chapter will grab you by the chest. The last chapter will change how you see yourself permanently. Best experienced through headphones. Find a quiet place. Let this land. Guan chapters. Chapter 1. The thing nobody told you about the life you've been living. Chapter 2. The drug nobody warned you about. Chapter 3. Who told you that you weren't enough? Chapter 4. The performance and the person. Chapter 5. What you call self-improvement and what it might actually be. Chapter 6. The secret chapter. What happens in the room where no one is watching? Chapter 7. The specific ways you abandon yourself. Chapter 8. What loving yourself actually looks like. Chapter 9. The relationships that reflect you back. Chapter 10. The grief nobody tells you to do. Chapter 11. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Chapter 12. Building the life that comes from the inside out. Chapter 13. The person you will be when you stop running. Chapter 14. The last thing, and the most true one. I've listened to hundreds of audiobooks. This one is different. Subscribe for weekly audiobooks on self-mastery, inner transformation, and the psychology of becoming who you actually are. Hashtags, hashtag self-love, hashtag personal development, hashtag audiobook, hashtag mindset shift, hashtag inner work, hashtag self-mastery, hashtag mental health, hashtag transformation, tags, self-love audiobook, stop chasing happiness, love yourself audiobook, self-mastery audiobook, personal development audiobook 2025, inner work audiobook, mindset transformation, self-improvement full audiobook, self-worth audiobook, stop people-pleasing, emotional healing audiobook, psychology of self-love, self-abandonment, finding yourself audiobook, motivational audiobook, life-changing audiobook, self-help audiobook full length, loving yourself fully, inner healing, become your true self, extended, additional depth passages. There is something I need to acknowledge before we go further. You may have picked up this book or arrived at this audio in a very specific emotional state, not the dramatic one, not the crisis state, the quieter, stranger one, the one where everything is fine and nothing is wrong, and yet something is pulling at you like a tide you can't quite see. Something is saying, there is more, not more achievement, not more success, more something that you don't quite have the language for yet. That pull is not dissatisfaction. That pull is the self, trying to be known. And I want you to understand something about the self before we dive into the architecture of all the ways we've learned to avoid it. The self is not fragile. That is the biggest lie the avoidance is built on. The idea that if you were to really go in, really look, really stop and face whatever is in there, it would be too much, too broken, too heavy, too complicated to survive. The self is not fragile. The self is the most resilient structure in the known universe. It has survived everything that has ever happened to you, every loss, every betrayal, every failed relationship and broken dream and morning when you woke up and didn't know how you were going to get through the day. It survived the version of you who was learning how to perform, and the version of you who forgot to feel, and the version of you who is reading this right now, carrying things you haven't said out loud to anyone. It survived all of that. It is still here, and it is not asking to be fixed. It is asking to be found. Marcus, the man from the beginning of this chapter, did eventually find it. Not in a single moment of revelation, not because he read the right book, or found the right therapist, or had the right conversation. He found it the way most people find it, incrementally, uncomfortably, one small act of honesty at a time, one moment of choosing the true thing over the easy thing, one morning of sitting with the discomfort long enough to hear what was underneath it. 2 years after the flatness first arrived, he was driving his daughter home from a school play. She was 9. She'd played a small role, not the lead, just a minor character, and she'd been excellent at it. Not excellent in the way that gets you applause, excellent in the way that only a parent watching their particular child can see. The specific quality of presence she brought, the way she listened even when it wasn't her turn to speak, the absolute commitment to being in the scene. He watched her in the rearview mirror on the drive home. She was humming something from the play. Her face was relaxed. In that way, faces are relaxed when you're not yet old enough to be watching yourself. Pure, not performing contentment, just in it. And he felt something land in his chest, something he recognized distantly as happiness. Not the spike, the other kind. The kind that doesn't need anything from the future to be real. The kind that is just here, just this, just the hum of a 9-year-old in the back seat, and the evening light, and the particular quality of this moment, which would never exist again, and was right now, complete. He pulled over, not dramatically, just he needed to not be driving for a second. He needed to be there, fully, without the next destination pulling at him, without the evaluating mind already moving on to what came after this. He sat in the parked car, on a side street in October, and felt his life land in his chest. And it was more than enough. That's what we're building toward, not a practice, not a philosophy. That, the moment when your life lands in your chest, and it is more than enough. Let's go find it. Let me tell you about the specific texture of a life lived in the anticipation rather than the arrival. It has a particular sound, a kind of low-level static. Not noise exactly, more like the absence of signal. A baseline hum of not quite right, that you've become so accustomed to that you only notice it when it briefly stops. When something, a perfect morning, a genuine laugh, a moment of unexpected grace, silences it temporarily, and in the silence you catch a glimpse of what it might feel like to be fully here. And then it returns, and you're back in the static, and you think, I need to find more of that. And so begins another pursuit. The pursuit is not the problem. I want to say that again clearly, because this book could be misread as an argument against ambition, against striving, against the beautiful human drive to move towards something. It is not that argument. The pursuit is not the problem. The problem is when the pursuit is the only mode available, when there is no receiving mode, no landing mode, no mode in which the present is allowed to be sufficient, without immediately needing to become something else. When the arrival is always provisional, a brief rest stop on the way to the next departure, then you are not experiencing a life, you are experiencing a transit system. And most people, if they're honest, live in the transit system. They live in the space between what they have and what they're trying to get. The space of not yet. And they've made the not yet feel like life. Because the not yet is where the dopamine lives, where the motivation lives, where the sense of aliveness that comes from moving toward something makes everything feel purposeful and charged and worth getting up for. Until it doesn't. Until the not yet has been going on for so long that you look up from the transit system and realize you don't know what the actual destination is anymore. You've been so absorbed in the movement that you've lost track of where you were going. Or worse, you arrive finally and discover the destination is also a transit system, that the thing you've been building toward was itself just another departure gate. This is the moment that breaks some people, not permanently, but temporarily, yes. The moment of arrival that doesn't arrive, when the achievement produces exactly the spike you predicted and then drops. And you're standing in the middle of your own success, looking at the trophy, and the voice comes, quiet but inexorable. Okay, and now what? What Marcus had, what the person reading this may also have, is not a motivation failure. It is not a failure to want the right things, or work hard enough, or be disciplined enough. It is the discovery, usually slow and usually reluctant, that the system you've been running is missing a fundamental component. The component is called arriving. And arriving is not a destination, it is a practice. A decision made, again and again, to let the present be enough, not to settle, not to stop growing, not to lower your standards, to receive what is already here while also moving toward what you want, to inhabit the transit system while also being present in each station, to love the person you are right now with the same generosity you're planning to offer the person you will be when you've improved enough. That practice is not natural for most people in the modern world, but it is learnable, and the learning starts with naming the alternative for what it is. The pursuit of happiness used as a flight from yourself, the constant forward motion used as a way of never having to land in the present and discover what's actually there. What's actually there when you land? Usually more than you expected. More complexity, yes. More unfinished grief sometimes, but also more beauty, more ordinary, unremarkable, available right now beauty than the transit system ever allowed you to see. The static goes quiet in those moments, and what fills the quiet is something that has been there all along, patient and unhurried, and requiring nothing except your willingness to stop long enough to receive it. Your own life, waiting for you to come home to it. Let me give you the updated translation. It is simpler than you might expect. It requires no elaborate reframing. It needs no particular psychological sophistication. It only requires honesty and the willingness to apply to yourself the same charitable interpretation you would offer without hesitation to anyone you loved. The updated translation is this: the people who shaped you did things that hurt you. Those things hurt you because you were young and open and building your understanding of the world and yourself. The things that hurt you were real. The wounds that came from them are real. And at the same time, those wounds were not a verdict on your worth. They were a collision between your vulnerability and someone else's limitation. You were not wrong to be hurt. They were not necessarily wrong to be limited. Both of those things can be true at once. And holding both, not collapsing into blame, not collapsing into forgiveness that covers over the real wound, is the beginning of the kind of healing that is not about pretending the pain wasn't real, but about deciding that the pain does not get to define your value. There is a specific thing that happens in the nervous system when we update the translation. Not immediately, not in one reading of one chapter, but over time, as we bring the new interpretation to bear again and again, applying it in real moments, in real situations, when the old translation fires automatically and the body says not enough, and the mind agrees, something shifts. The old interpretation loses its authority, not because you've argued it into submission, because you've offered it an alternative that is more accurate and, crucially, more kind. The old translation was, "Their limitation means my deficiency." The new translation is, "Their limitation means their limitation." And the self that was built on the old translation, the self that has been working so hard to overcome a deficiency that was never real, begins to ask a different question. Not, how do I become enough? But, what does it mean to already be? That question does not produce a quick answer. It produces a long one that unfolds over months and years, and the accumulated experience of choosing to treat yourself as already worthy, even when the old voice says you haven't earned it yet. But the unfolding is the work. not the arrival at a final answer. Because the final answer is always the same, and it is always available, and it has been available your entire life. You are enough, not at the finish line, here, as what you are, as the complicated, specific, unrepeatable human being you have been since before you had language to describe yourself. The translation always was wrong. You were always enough. And the rest of this book is about building a life on that foundation, not as a comfortable belief, but as a lived practice, as the actual daily experience of a person who has decided, finally, to stop waiting for the verdict and to live as though the verdict was already in. Because it was. It always was. You just didn't know you were allowed to read it. Here is what the honest investigation of that question tends to produce. Not immediately, not in the first sitting with it, but as you hold it, as you let the question live with you rather than rushing to resolve it, a landscape begins to emerge, the topography of your actual motivation, the real terrain underneath the stated goals. And what you tend to find, when you look honestly, is a mixture. There is the genuine part, the ambition that comes from real curiosity, real desire, real love of the work or the craft or the people it serves, the part that would still show up if no one was watching, if no one was grading, if the scorecards ceased to exist. The part that is, in the truest sense of the word, yours. And then there is the other part, the part that is driven by something older, something more anxious, something that has less to do with the goal itself and more to do with the silence the goal fills. The part that is running toward achievement because achievement is the one place the voice goes quiet. The part that is working harder and harder not to grow, but to escape the feeling that without the work, there would be nothing underneath it. This is not a shameful thing to discover. It is in fact a very human thing. The people who are most driven are often running from the most. That is not irony. That is the engine of some of the most extraordinary things ever built. The wound can produce remarkable output. The wound has produced symphonies, movements, revolutions, architectures of unprecedented beauty and complexity, but the wound cannot produce peace. And at some point, maybe this point, maybe later, maybe in the middle of another achievement that doesn't land the way it was supposed to, the question stops being what can I build and starts being what would it feel like to stop building for a moment and just be. That question is the beginning of something that the achievement by itself could never offer. Not a retreat from ambition, a reorientation of it. An ambition that is grounded in self-love rather than driven by self-contempt. An ambition that can rest when rest is needed without calling the rest failure. An ambition that produces not just outcomes, but the actual lived experience of a person who knows why they are doing what they are doing. Not to escape, not to prove, but to express. To bring into the world something that genuinely wanted to come from you, because you, as you actually are, have something genuinely worth offering. That version of ambition is available to you, but it requires the investigation first, the honest, uncomfortable, sometimes disorienting investigation into what is real beneath the performance, into what you would want and who you would be if the scoreboard disappeared, into the fear that might be living in the engine of the drive and what it needs, what would actually satisfy it, what was the original wound, and is the current strategy actually addressing it or simply outrunning it? Most strategies are outrunning it, and outrunning it is exhausting, which is why, even when everything on the surface is going well, there is that background exhaustion, the one that sleep doesn't fix, the one that vacation doesn't fix, the one that even success, when it arrives, only quiets temporarily before reasserting itself. That exhaustion is the cost of the outrunning. And the alternative, the actual alternative, not a lesser version, is not to stop moving. It is to start moving from a different place, from the inside out, from love rather than fear, from genuine desire rather than anxious proof, from the self that already knows it is enough and therefore does not need the achievement to confirm it. That self produces work that is different in kind, not just in quality. You can feel the difference. You felt it in other people's work. The piece of writing, the performance, the product, the conversation that arrives from some place of genuine authority, not confidence in the performative sense, authority. The sense that the person who made this was making it from a deep alignment with themselves. You can produce that, not by becoming more disciplined, by becoming more honest about what is real, what is fear, what is yours versus borrowed. What would remain if the audience disappeared? What remains is the real thing, and the real thing is what you're here to build. Let me add something to this chapter that doesn't fit neatly into any of the categories already covered. Self-love in practice also looks like celebration, not the public kind, not the social media milestone, the private kind. The acknowledgement offered to yourself that something was hard and you did it anyway, that something mattered and you showed up for it, that you were afraid and you moved toward the fear rather than away from it. Most people are extraordinarily bad at this. They can catalog their failures with the precision of forensic scientists and the staying power of archivists. The mistakes of 5 years ago are as accessible as the mistakes of last Tuesday. The moments of falling short are filed and cross-referenced and available for retrieval at any moment. Usually the moments when they can do the most damage, the moments of getting it right, the genuine efforts, the days when you showed up tired and frightened and uncertain and showed up anyway. Those evaporate, not because they didn't happen, because most people have never practiced the discipline of receiving them, never developed the skill of saying to themselves, I did that, that was hard and I did it and it matters. This is not arrogance. Arrogance compares. Celebration simply acknowledges, and the acknowledgement matters for the same reason the keeping of promises matters, because it teaches the deepest part of you something about how you're regarded by the person who has the most power over your inner life. That person is you, and that person is paying attention to everything, to every broken promise, yes, but also to every unkept celebration, every moment when something real was done and went unwitnessed, even internally. The deepest part of you is keeping score, not vindictively, quietly, accurately. And the score it is keeping is not about achievement, it is about care, about whether the person running this life treats the person living it with the same decency they'd offer a friend. Start offering the decency, specifically, not in the abstract. Specifically, when you finish something hard, stop. Take 30 seconds. Say to yourself, internally, with the same genuine warmth you'd offer someone you love, that was hard, and I did it. That's real. That counts. When you handled something difficult with more grace than you expected from yourself, notice it. Don't let it pass unremarked. Don't move immediately to the next thing. Stay with it for just a breath. The quiet satisfaction of having been, in that moment, exactly who you wanted to be. When you chose the true thing over the easy thing, the honest word, the kept boundary, the genuine emotion rather than the managed one. Honor that. Not with fanfare, with the simple, private acknowledgement that something real happened. This accumulates, not in the ledger of self-congratulation, in the architecture of self-trust, in the slow, evidence-based building of a relationship with yourself, where the evidence is real and the relationship is earned and the love is not conditional on the next achievement, but grounded in the actual history of someone who has been showing up imperfectly and genuinely for the life they are actually living. That is a person worth loving. That person is you. The celebration is not the point. The recognition is the point, and recognition, given honestly, given specifically, given to the actual person doing the actual work of actually living, is the language love speaks when it is fully awake. Speak it to yourself, not once, not as a technique, as a practice, as the daily, unremarkable, life-altering discipline of treating yourself like someone whose efforts deserve to be seen, because they do. You do. Every single day that you get up and try, that is worth seeing. See it. There is a specific kind of loneliness that nobody names clearly enough. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is the loneliness of being surrounded and still not reached. The loneliness of a room full of people who know you and none of them, not one, knowing the thing that is most alive in you right now. The conversation that always stops 3 inches short of the real thing. The connection that is warm and genuine and real and somehow still not enough. This is the loneliness of the unmet self, and it is the most common form of loneliness in the developed world, where we are more connected than any generation in history and more lonely in this particular way than perhaps any generation before us. Because connection requires self-knowledge. You cannot be truly known if you do not truly know yourself. You can be liked, you can be admired, you can have dozens of relationships that function beautifully at the surface, that provide warmth and support and the pleasure of shared history. But the depth that you are actually capable of, the kind of knowing that feels like finally being seen, that feels like someone has turned on a light in a room you'd forgotten existed, that depth is only possible from a self that has been met. And the paradox is that the depth you crave in your relationships is available to you first through the relationship with yourself, not instead of other people, before, as the foundation, as the thing that makes the reaching toward others possible rather than desperate. Because reaching toward others from a place of self-knowledge is connection. Reaching toward others from a place of self-ignorance is a search party. You've been sending search parties, looking for the self in other people's eyes, looking for the confirmation of your value in their approval, looking for the feeling of being enough in the experience of being chosen romantically, professionally, socially, in any of the 100 daily ways we are selected and rejected, and what we make those selections mean about ourselves. This is not a failure of love, it is a failure of sequence. The sequence goes self-knowledge first, then self-love. Then, from that foundation, from that groundedness, from that quiet certainty that you exist and matter before anyone chooses you, then the reaching toward others. From that place, the reaching is different. It is not a search, it is an offering. Here is who I am, here is what I actually think and feel and carry. Here is the full person, complicated and unpolished and worth knowing. And either you know me from there or we have a pleasant enough relationship that doesn't reach that depth, and I am okay with either, because I am not looking to you to tell me whether I exist. That version of relating, that is what the full relationship with yourself makes possible. Not indifference, not self-sufficiency in the cold sense. The opposite. A warmth so grounded that it doesn't need to be affirmed to be real. That is what is possible for you. That is what the work of self-knowledge and self-love is building toward. Not a life without others, but a life with others that is actually shared, actually mutual, actually deep enough to be worth the vulnerability it requires. You deserve relationships that deep. Build the foundation first. The foundation is you. I want to talk about a specific grief that doesn't have a name. The grief of the life you didn't live because you were afraid. Not the dramatic life, not some fantasy of who you might have been in another dimension. The specific, actual possibilities that existed and were not taken. The conversation you didn't have because the vulnerability felt too risky, the work you didn't pursue because the failure felt too possible, the relationship you didn't fully enter because loving completely means loss is completely possible, the version of yourself you kept in reserve, offered in smaller and safer portions because the full version felt too much to risk. These are not dramatic losses, they are quiet ones. They are the kind of losses that the world doesn't recognize as losses at all, because from the outside there was no visible accident, no clear event, nothing that explains the ache. But the ache is real. It is the ache of the unlived, of the potential that existed and was not reached for, of the moments that were offered and half received, of the self that was available and kept hidden. And grieving this, allowing yourself to actually feel the weight of the unlived, without catastrophizing and without dismissal, just feeling it with the same compassion you would offer anyone who had lost something real, is one of the most important acts of self-love available to you. Because it does two things. First, it honors the reality of the loss. It refuses to minimize it, to be stoic about it, to perform acceptance of something that actually deserves to be mourned. The unlived matters. The version of you that stayed hidden matters. The conversation that was half given matters. Grieving, it says, that was real, and it mattered, and I am allowed to feel its absence. Second, and this is the one that changes the future, it clears the path. When we carry ungrieved loss, it operates as a negative prediction. It says, you will lose again, you will reach for the full thing and it will hurt. Better to stay in the smaller version, the safer version, the version that can't hurt you as badly because you never invested enough to lose much. The ungrieved past becomes the fearful future. But when the grief is done, when you have actually moved through the sadness of what was not taken, not with punishment, but with compassion, not with regret that collapses into paralysis, but with the kind of honest mourning that says, this happened and it is real and I am moved by its having been. Then something opens. The negative prediction loses its authority, not because the risk disappears. The risk of loss is always real. Love is always losable. Authenticity is always exposable. Reaching for the full life always means the full life can fall short. But the grief, completed, teaches you something that no self-help book can install artificially. That you survived the last loss, that the thing you were afraid would destroy you, the failure, the rejection, the revelation that you had hoped too much, did not destroy you, that you are still here, still capable, still more than the worst thing that happened. Grief, when it is finished, produces a strange and quiet courage, not bravado, not the defiant proclamation that you are no longer afraid, just the sober, evidence-based knowledge that you are someone who has been hurt and is still standing and is therefore capable of being hurt again and still standing. That knowledge changes what you reach for. It lets you reach further, and the life that is reachable from there is not the half-life of the protected self. It is the full thing. The actual, beautiful, terrifying, genuine, full life that was always possible and is still possible and requires only this, the willingness to grieve what was lost so that the hands that were holding it can open for what is still available. Open your hands. What is still available is extraordinary. Here is what the inside-out life looks like on a Tuesday, not on the peak days, not on the days when everything aligns and the work flows and the relationships sing and the body feels strong and you can feel clearly the person you are becoming. The peak days are easy. The peak days sell themselves. Tuesday, ordinary. Nothing special about it. Coffee that is fine. Work that is neither terrible nor thrilling. A conversation with someone close to you that doesn't go as deep as you'd like but is warm enough. A meal eaten while reading something. An evening that is neither exciting nor awful. Who are you on that Tuesday? Are you present in it? Or are you already somewhere else? In the weekend coming? In the project finishing? In the version of the week that has enough excitement to justify the showing up? The inside-out life is most legible on the Tuesday because the inside-out life is not a life in which every day is extraordinary. It is a life in which the ordinary is met with the same fundamental care and presence that the extraordinary demands. A life in which Tuesday is not a waiting room, a life in which the coffee, the work, the warm enough conversation, the meal, the evening are understood to be the texture of the actual life, not the filler between the real parts. There are no filler parts. Your Tuesdays are your life. If you spend them waiting for Friday, you are spending your life waiting. If you spend them performing fine rather than actually feeling what Tuesday actually is, which might be genuinely good in quiet ways, or genuinely difficult in quiet ways, or genuinely uncertain in ways you haven't allowed yourself to acknowledge, then you are spending your life in the transit system. The inside-out life asks you to be in Tuesday, to make the coffee and actually taste it, to do the work and actually notice what it requires of you and what it gives back, to have the warm enough conversation and be genuinely present in the warmth, not lamenting the depth that's missing, to eat the meal and feel the body receiving it, to sit in the evening and let it be what it is, an ending, which is also a continuity, which is also a version of the rest your body needs and the silence your mind is hungry for, even when it protests, that it needs more stimulation. To be in Tuesday is not a small thing, it is the whole thing. Because being in Tuesday is being in your life, actually in it. Not observing it, not managing it, not measuring it against what it should be, in it. And from that place, from the actual inhabiting of the actual life, the inside-out building begins, not from a vision board, not from a list of aspirational behaviors, from the lived, embodied, present tense experience of who you actually are and what you actually need, and what the actual day in front of you is actually asking of you. That is where the real decisions come from, not from the plans made in peak moments about who you'll be when you've optimized enough. From the honest, present, Tuesday-level reckoning with what is real, what is needed, what would actually serve the person you are, not the person you're becoming, not the person the plan describes, but the person right here, with yesterday behind them and tomorrow ahead of them, standing in the middle of an ordinary morning that contains, like all ordinary mornings, the whole of the life. Be in it. That is the instruction, the only instruction. Everything else follows from there. Here is something nobody tells you about the stopping. The stopping doesn't look like stopping from the outside. From the outside, it often looks like more presence, more engagement, more genuinely showing up than you were before. What stops is the internal running, the constant narration of inadequacy, the monitoring system, the performance review that was running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in the background of every experience you were having. When that stops, you have more of yourself available, not a quieter self, a fuller one. A self that is not constantly allocating a percentage of its resources to the management of the impression it's making, the tracking of whether it's doing enough, the comparison of its current standing against some always moving benchmark. What you get when the running stops is all of yourself. And all of yourself is a great deal more than you've been working with. The people around you notice this before you do, usually. There is something different about a person who has stopped running from themselves. Not a visible thing, not a performative change. Something in the quality of their attention. They are more actually present in conversations, not because they're trying harder to listen, but because they're not simultaneously managing their own internal broadcast. They laugh in a way that doesn't monitor itself. They disagree without it feeling like an act of aggression or an act of bravery. They are just there, fully, the whole person in the room engaged with what is actually happening. That quality of presence is magnetic, not because it is impressive, because it is rare, because most people spend most of their time in a room with most of their self somewhere else, and when they encounter someone who is genuinely, completely here, who is looking at them rather than through them, who is listening rather than preparing their response, who is actually in this moment rather than in the next one, they feel it, they lean toward it, they recognize it as something they have been hungry for without having a name for the hunger. That person can be you, not by trying harder, by running less. And the running less begins with the recognition that whatever you've been running toward is here. The arrival you've been moving toward is now. The person you've been becoming is already the person doing the becoming. You don't have to get somewhere to be someone. You are someone. Here, now, this, and this, ordinary, imperfect, complicated, genuinely yours, is more than enough to build a life from. It always was. It always will be. And the proof is in the only evidence that has ever mattered. You are still here, after everything, still showing up, still asking the questions, still, despite everything you've been through and everything you've told yourself, and every morning that felt impossible, and every night that felt too long, still reaching, still growing, still awake enough to be reading these words and feeling something stir in response to them. That is not nothing. That is everything. That is you. Go live it.